The biggest mistake in the galaxy isn't pointing a gun at a human. It's pointing one at the person he calls a friend. The air inside docking ring 7 smelled of overheated circuitry, machine oil, and recycled oxygen. A low mechanical hum vibrated through the deck, plates beneath hundreds of travelers moving through Helios Station, one of the largest independent trade hubs on the outer frontier. Cargo drones floated overhead carrying sealed containers. Digital advertisements flickered across curved walls. Somewhere in the distance, a transport horn echoed through the massive structure like the call of some metallic beast. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded normal. And yet every person in the terminal had stopped moving. Silence spread through the station faster than any alarm. Jake Walker stood completely still near the center of the concourse. He wore a dark gray work jacket over a faded black shirt, the kind of clothing that helped him blend into a crowd. At 34 years old, he looked more like a freight contractor than a former Marine. His brown hair was slightly too long. A few days of stubble shadowed his jaw. Nothing about him suggested danger. Nothing about him suggested that dozens of people around him were secretly watching his reaction. 20 feet away, standing beneath the blue glow of a departure board, was Lyria Voss. Her silver hair rested against the collar of a simple white travel coat. Her pale skin reflected the station lights with an almost porcelain softness. She looked calm, almost too calm. The problem was the figure standing beside her. A tall man dressed in dark tactical clothing held a compact plasma sidearm near her temple. The weapon itself was not unusual. Helios Station had seen worse. What made the situation unusual was the public broadcast. Every screen in the terminal suddenly displayed the same image. Lyria, the armed man, and Jake. A distorted voice emerged from the station speakers. Attention, citizens of Helios. We have a message for one particular human. Nervous whispers spread through the crowd. Travelers exchanged worried looks. Shop owners slowly stepped away from their counters. Security personnel watched from a distance, uncertain whether moving closer would make things worse. Jake remained motionless. The distorted voice continued. Jake Walker, one more step and your friend misses her transport. The man beside Lyria smiled. He clearly expected fear, maybe panic, maybe bargaining. Instead, Jake looked at him for several seconds and then did something unexpected. He smiled. It wasn't a large smile. It wasn't dramatic, but it immediately changed the atmosphere. Because Lyria knew that smile. Several people in the crowd knew it too. It was the smile Jake wore whenever someone made a serious mistake without realizing it. The armed man shifted slightly. You think this is funny? Jake shrugged. No, his voice remained calm, relaxed. I think it's expensive. A few confused expressions appeared among the spectators. Even Lyria briefly narrowed her eyes. The man holding the weapon laughed. You don't seem to understand the situation. Jake glanced around the station. Thousands of lights reflected from the curved glass, ceiling nearly 300 feet overhead. Cargo ships drifted outside the transparent sections of hull, like silent giants crossing a sea of stars. Then he looked back at the man. Actually, Jake said, I understand it perfectly. The stranger's confidence weakened for a fraction of a second. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for Jake. Enough for Lyria. The distorted voice returned through the speakers. You have something we want. Cooperate, and your friend walks away. Jake folded his arms. And if I don't? The crowd seemed to hold its breath. Lyria never looked away from him. Her pale gray eyes remained steady. Fear wasn't visible there. Neither was desperation. Instead, there was something closer to concern. Not for herself. For him. Because she knew exactly what happened when someone threatened people Jake cared about. The stranger gestured with the weapon. Then things become difficult. Jake exhaled slowly. Around him, dozens of station workers quietly exchanged glances. Mechanics, cargo handlers, pilots, merchants, technicians, people who recognized him, people who owed him favors, people who remembered small acts of kindness most of the galaxy considered worthless. The stranger saw none of it. He only saw a single human standing alone. Jake looked toward Lyria again. For a moment, Neither spoke. Then she gave the smallest shake of her head, a silent warning. Don't do anything reckless. Jake's smile softened. Lyria, he called across the concourse. You okay? The silver-haired woman rolled her eyes. I've had better mornings. Several people nearby actually laughed, even under the circumstances. Jake nodded. Good. The armed man frowned. Good. Jake's gaze shifted back to him. Calm. Steady. Unbothered. Yeah, he said. Because now I know you're the one having the bad morning. Across Helios Station, thousands of people watched the standoff unfold. None of them understood it yet. None of them realized the lesson that was about to be learned. But before the day was over, the entire station would remember one simple rule. Never put a gun to a human's friend. The stranger studied Jake for several long seconds, as if trying to solve a puzzle that refused to cooperate. Around them, Helios Station remained frozen in uneasy silence. The departure boards continued updating schedules. Freight drones continued their programmed routes. Somewhere overhead, an automated voice announced the arrival of a cargo vessel from the Vega corridor. Life was still moving, yet every eye seemed locked on the same moment. Jake slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. The gesture looked casual, but Lyria knew him too well. Whenever he appeared this relaxed, it usually meant his mind was working faster than everyone else's. The stranger finally broke the silence. You seem remarkably calm for someone watching his friend become leverage. Jake tilted his head slightly. You seem remarkably confident for someone who does not know who he is dealing with. A few nervous chuckles came from nearby travelers. The stranger did not appreciate them. His posture stiffened. Lyria watched the exchange carefully. She had spent years serving as a security officer across multiple systems. She knew intimidation when she saw it. She also knew when intimidation was failing. The problem was simple. Whoever planned this operation had gathered information about cargo routes, station schedules, and communications networks. They had apparently forgotten to research Jake Walker. Most people did. That was the funny thing about Jake. Nothing about him attracted attention. He was not wealthy. He did not own a fleet. He held no political office. His apartment occupied a modest corner of Helios Station overlooking Docking Ring 4. His transport ship was 15 years old and carried enough maintenance scars to tell 100 stories. He drank cheap coffee. He repaired his own equipment. He rarely talked about his military service. In a galaxy obsessed with status, Jake looked forgettable, which was exactly why people kept underestimating him. The stranger gestured toward the cameras. You think your reputation protects you? Jake laughed softly. What reputation? The answer seemed genuine. That made it even more confusing. Lyria almost smiled despite the situation. 3 years earlier, she would have been confused too. Back then, she had first met Jake during a supply run near the frontier. A damaged freighter had lost power during a solar storm. Several ships ignored the distress signal. Jake did not. He had spent 14 exhausting hours helping complete strangers secure repairs while his own delivery deadline slipped away. When the grateful crew offered him a reward, he refused. When they asked why, he simply said they needed the money more than he did. Lyria remembered thinking he was either unusually kind or completely insane. Over time, she discovered the answer was both. Across Helios Station, dozens of people carried similar stories. Jake helped stranded travelers, fixed broken systems, delivered emergency medicine without charging extra, sat with lonely veterans who had nobody left to talk to, remembered names, remembered birthdays, remembered promises, small things, ordinary things, the sort of things most people forgot, the sort of things that somehow changed lives. The stranger saw none of that. He only saw a human standing alone in a crowded station. Last chance, the distorted voice announced through the speakers. Provide access to the data package. Jake blinked. You're still talking about that? The man frowned. You have it. Of course I do. The answer surprised everyone. Even Lyria looked confused. Jake shrugged. I'm a cargo contractor. People pay me to transport things. Possessing cargo is literally my job description. The crowd laughed again. This time the sound spread farther. The stranger's frustration became visible. Helios Station was supposed to feel afraid. Instead, it felt annoyed. Lyria noticed something else. People were moving. Slowly, quietly. A maintenance worker stepped out of a repair corridor. A docking supervisor exited a nearby office. Two pilots appeared near a boarding gate. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. Just ordinary people gathering closer. Jake noticed too. His expression never changed. "You know," he said calmly, looking directly at the armed man, "there is something interesting about Helios." The stranger said nothing. Jake continued, "Most people think this station runs on credits. They are wrong." The man narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Jake glanced around the enormous concourse filled with merchants, engineers, mechanics, traders, and travelers from 100 worlds. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Helios runs on favors." For the first time since the broadcast began, uncertainty appeared in the stranger's eyes. And somewhere deep within the station, unseen by nearly everyone present, the first pieces of a much larger response were already beginning to move. The stranger opened his mouth to respond, but another sound interrupted him. A soft metallic chime echoed across the concourse. Then another. Then three more in rapid succession. Most visitors ignored the sounds. Helios Station produced thousands of notifications every hour, but Jake recognized them immediately. So did several workers standing near the maintenance corridors. Messages were spreading through the station network. Not emergency alerts. Not security bulletins. Something far older than official channels. Word of mouth. The most powerful communications system ever invented. Jake glanced toward a nearby storefront where an elderly mechanic stood behind a counter filled with replacement components. The mechanic gave the slightest nod before disappearing into a back room. Two docking supervisors exchanged looks and quietly walked away from their terminals. A cargo pilot closed his tablet and headed toward a service elevator. None of it looked unusual. That was the point. The stranger noticed movement, but failed to understand its meaning. He was focused on Jake, focused on controlling the moment, focused on forcing a negotiation. The problem was that negotiations required leverage, and leverage only worked when people believed they were alone. Jake had not been alone on Helios Station for a very long time. Lyria watched him carefully. Her silver hair reflected the blue station lights as she stood beside her captor. She knew something was happening. She simply did not know how much. "Jake," she said calmly, "do not be stupid." Several travelers nearby looked surprised. The statement sounded almost rude. Jake only smiled. "That is a strange request. I am serious." Her voice softened slightly. "Whatever they want is not worth creating a bigger problem." Jake studied her for a moment. Even now, she was trying to protect other people from unnecessary trouble. That was Lyria. Practical, responsible, always carrying more weight than anyone realized. 3 years ago, those same qualities had saved his life. The memory surfaced unexpectedly. He could still smell ozone from the damaged freighter drifting powerless near the frontier. He could still remember warning lights flashing across his cockpit. His transport vessel had been struggling through the aftermath of a solar storm when a navigation error sent him dangerously close to a debris field. One mistake, one bad calculation. Suddenly his engines were failing. Communications were unstable. Rescue ships were hours away. Then an unfamiliar vessel appeared from nowhere. White hull, silver markings, security registration codes. Lyria's ship. She had no obligation to help him. Regulations actually encourage security officers to avoid hazardous recovery operations without support. Yet she had ignored the recommendation entirely. For 6 exhausting hours, she coordinated repairs, stabilized communications, and guided his damaged vessel to safety. Afterward, when Jake thanked her repeatedly, she looked genuinely confused. "I did my job," she told him. Jake remembered laughing. Most people do not do their jobs that well. She had rolled her eyes and walked away. Somehow, that became coffee. Then conversations. Then friendship. Not because they were similar. They were not. Lyria followed rules. Jake bent them whenever common sense demanded it. She planned everything. He trusted instinct. She believed trust should be earned slowly. Jake handed it out freely and somehow survived the consequences. Yet over time, they discovered something unexpected. Both cared deeply about people. They simply expressed it differently. A crackling sound pulled Jake back to the present. One of the station screens flickered. The stranger immediately looked upward. "Focus," he snapped. "You are running out of options." Jake followed his gaze toward the giant display. Flight schedules disappeared. For a brief second, the screen went blank. Then a maintenance diagnostic appeared. Harmless. Ordinary. Nothing suspicious. Yet several people in the crowd smiled. The stranger missed that too. Lyria did not. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Jake," she said quietly, "what exactly is happening?" He looked at her. The answer appeared simple enough. "People are paying attention." She almost laughed. Only Jake could make that sound significant. Then another notification chimed somewhere inside the station. Then another. Then another. Like distant raindrops striking metal rooftops. Across Helios Station, messages continued moving through maintenance channels, shipping networks, repair crews, merchant groups, and private contacts. One name appeared over and over again. Jake Walker. By itself, the name meant very little. But attached to thousands of memories, favors, and acts of kindness accumulated over years, it carried surprising weight. And for the first time since arriving at the station, Lyria began to suspect that the armed stranger had made a mistake far larger than he realized. The stranger checked a data pad attached to his wrist and frowned. Whatever information he expected to see was not there. Around the concourse, more people continued arriving in small numbers. A woman in a grease-stained maintenance uniform leaned against the support column. Two cargo haulers parked their transport carts near a service corridor and remained there. A gray-haired merchant quietly closed his storefront despite the middle of the business day. None of them approached Jake directly. None of them said a word. They simply stayed, watching, waiting. The stranger noticed the growing crowd and forced a laugh. "You think this changes anything?" Jake glanced around the station. "No." The answer seemed to surprise him. "Then why are you smiling?" Jake looked toward the transparent ceiling high above them. Beyond the glass, stars burned against the darkness of space. Freighters drifted between docking rings like slow-moving islands. "Because you still do not understand what is happening." The distorted voice returned through the station speakers. This time it sounded less confident. "Enough games. We know you're transporting a classified data package. Transfer access immediately." Several people exchanged confused looks. Jake scratched the side of his neck. "You caused all this over cargo?" The stranger's jaw tightened. "That cargo is worth millions of credits." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That explains a lot." "Good. Then cooperate." Jake laughed softly. "No, it explains why you are here. It does not explain why you thought threatening Lyria was a good idea." The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Lyria studied him carefully. There was no fear in his voice. No anger either. Just disappointment. As if someone had made a foolish business decision. The stranger shifted his weight. "You keep acting as if you have control." "I do not need control." Jake replied. "I only need time." For the first time, uncertainty appeared openly on the man's face. Lyria noticed it immediately. So did several station workers. The stranger looked around. More people had gathered. A station medic stood near a vending kiosk. 3 engineers occupied a nearby observation deck. 2 retired pilots sat at a cafe that had suddenly become very interested in current events. None of them appeared threatening. Yet somehow the situation felt less secure with every passing minute. A notification chimed from a nearby terminal. Then another. Then 5 more. Information moved through Helios faster than cargo. Stories moved even faster. The stranger finally pointed toward Jake. "What exactly did you do?" Jake blinked. "Today. Any day." The human considered the question. It was strangely difficult to answer. He remembered helping repair a damaged life support unit for a struggling family 6 months earlier. He remembered delivering medicine through a radiation storm because a colony could not wait another day. He remembered fixing docking software for a mechanic who could not afford a replacement license. Small things. Forgettable things. At least to him. "Not much," Jake said honestly. A woman near the crowd laughed. A cargo operator shook his head. An elderly merchant rolled his eyes. The reaction confused the stranger even more. Lyria almost smiled. She understood now. The station was not gathering because Jake was powerful. It was gathering because Jake mattered. There was a difference. One earned obedience. The other earned loyalty. The stranger had spent his life understanding power. He clearly knew very little about loyalty. Another station screen flickered. A maintenance report appeared and vanished. Then a docking manifest flashed across the display. Harmless information. Yet the stranger watched it nervously. He was beginning to realize something important. Systems were moving around him. People were communicating. Doors were opening. Resources were shifting. Helios Station itself seemed awake. The man lowered his voice. You planned this. Jake looked genuinely surprised. No. Then why does everyone keep showing up? The answer came from somewhere behind him. Because he showed up for us. The stranger turned. A mechanic stood there holding a toolbox. Then another voice spoke from the opposite side of the concourse. 3 years ago, he saved my business. Another followed. He helped my daughter get medical treatment. Then another. He repaired our navigation systems for free. The comments spread through the crowd like ripples across water. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. One memory after another. One story after another. The stranger slowly realized that the gathering crowd was not responding to a call for help. There had been no call. Nobody had ordered them to come. Nobody had paid them. Nobody had organized them. They had simply heard Jake Walker's name and decided they belonged here. Beside him, Lyria finally understood the full shape of the problem facing their captors. The operation had never been about one human and one hostage. It had become something much larger. And somewhere deep beneath Helios Station, hidden within maintenance tunnels and service corridors, the next stage of events had already begun. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The vast concourse of Helios Station seemed suspended between two realities. In one reality, a group of criminals still believed they controlled the situation. In the other, that control had already begun slipping away. The station lights reflected across polished metal floors. Ventilation systems whispered through hidden ducts. Somewhere far below, freight elevators continued carrying cargo between docking levels. Life moved forward, but every person present could feel the atmosphere changing. The stranger looked around at the growing crowd and suddenly appeared less certain than before. That uncertainty spread to the others working with him. Small details gave them away. Nervous glances, tightened shoulders, frequent checks of their communication devices. They were expecting authority to obey them. Instead, they were discovering something far more difficult to manage. Community. Lyria watched the reactions carefully. Years of security work had trained her to read people. The crowd was not angry. That was what made it remarkable. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was making threats. Nobody was demanding revenge. They were simply present, calm, steady, united. It created a pressure that could not be measured by weapons or numbers. Jake remained exactly where he was, hands still inside his jacket pockets, expression relaxed. The stranger finally pointed toward the surrounding crowd. They cannot help you. Jake nodded. Probably not. The answer seemed to confuse him again. Then why are they here? Before Jake could answer, a soft voice came from nearby. An elderly woman stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. She operated a small supply store near Docking Ring 3. Most travelers barely noticed her shop. Jake visited every week. Because he would be here for us, she said simply. Another voice followed. A young technician lifted a hand. 3 years ago, my apprentice damaged a reactor controller. He smiled faintly. Everyone else blamed him. Jake helped fix it and never told management who made the mistake. A pilot near the observation deck laughed. He spent 12 straight hours helping me repair navigation systems during a storm. More stories emerged. Not dramatic stories. Not legendary stories. Human stories. Ordinary moments that most people would have forgotten. Jake remembered very few of them. The people around him remembered every detail. Lyria felt something unexpected in her chest. Pride. Not pride for herself. Pride for her friend. She had always known Jake was kind. She had not realized how many lives that kindness had touched. The stranger looked increasingly uncomfortable. His operation depended on fear. Fear was becoming difficult to maintain. Another notification appeared on a public terminal. Then another. Maintenance teams were moving through the station. Docking supervisors were rerouting traffic. Communication channels remained active. Everything was perfectly legal, perfectly normal. Yet somehow, every system seemed to be working against the criminals without ever directly confronting them. The stranger activated his wrist device. Status report. Static answered him. His expression darkened. He tried again. More static. Nearby, a mechanic quietly sipped coffee and looked away. Jake noticed. The mechanic winked. Larry almost laughed. Helios Station was fighting back in the most Helios way possible. Not through force, through cooperation. The stranger lowered his arm. For the first time, genuine concern appeared in his eyes. Jake finally removed one hand from his pocket and pointed toward the crowd. You keep asking why they are here. The man said nothing. Jake looked around the station. Hundreds of faces looked back. Mechanics, pilots, merchants, engineers, medics, travelers, people from dozens of worlds, different species, different backgrounds, different beliefs, yet standing together all the same. You made a mistake, Jake said quietly. You thought friendship was a weakness. The words settled over the concourse. Nobody interrupted. Nobody needed to, because everyone present understood exactly what he meant. The stranger slowly followed Jake's gaze across the crowd. For the first time, he seemed to realize he was not looking at strangers. He was looking at relationships. Years of trust. Years of favors. Years of kindness returned. Things that could not be purchased. Things that could not be intimidated. Things that could not be turned off with a command. Somewhere deep inside Helios Station, another message quietly reached its destination. Another person heard Jake Walker's name. Another person decided to come. And the crowd continued to grow. The stranger stared at the crowd and finally stopped pretending everything was under control. The confidence that had carried him through the beginning of the operation was fading beneath the weight of something he could not measure. Numbers he understood. Weapons he understood. Threats, leverage, pressure, negotiation. Those were familiar tools. What surrounded him now was different. Helios Station was responding like a living organism. Quietly, patiently, collectively. A soft chime echoed from one of the public terminals. Then another. Across the concourse, status screens updated. Docking schedules shifted. Cargo assignments changed. Maintenance requests appeared and disappeared. None of it seemed connected. Yet somehow, every small adjustment created a larger pattern. Jake noticed the pattern immediately. Lyria noticed it a few moments later. The stranger never noticed it at all. You are smiling again, Lyria said from across the terminal. Jake shrugged. I like seeing competent people at work. She followed his gaze toward the crowd. More station workers had arrived. A group of engineers stood near an access corridor. Several freight operators occupied a loading zone. Two medics chatted beside a transport cart. Nobody looked nervous. Nobody looked aggressive. They simply looked ready. You planned this, the stranger said again. Jake shook his head. That would require me to know you were coming. Then how is this happening? Jake glanced around the station. People talk. The answer sounded ridiculous. The stranger clearly thought so too. But Lyria understood. Reputation traveled faster than starships, especially the kind earned over years instead of purchased with money. She remembered dozens of small moments involving Jake. He always acted as if kindness cost nothing. Yet somehow it kept accumulating value. 3 months earlier, he had spent an entire weekend helping repair life support systems in a residential sector after a coolant failure. Nobody paid him. Nobody asked him. He simply noticed a problem and stayed until it was fixed. 6 months before that, he organized food deliveries during a supply shortage affecting several lower-income families. He never told anyone. People only learned about it afterward. The memories continued surfacing. Small acts. Ordinary acts. Yet each one had created another connection, another relationship, another reason for someone to answer when his name appeared on a screen. The stranger activated his communicator again. Report. Silence answered him. His jaw tightened. Nearby, A young technician pretended to study a maintenance panel while hiding a smile. Jake noticed. So did several others. Nobody said anything. The stranger lowered the device. "What did you do to my communications?" Jake looked genuinely offended. "Nothing." He pointed toward a maintenance crew crossing the terminal. "Ask them. I barely understand station networking." The statement triggered several laughs from the crowd. Lyria actually smiled this time. The stranger did not appreciate becoming the center of a joke. Yet he could not challenge the statement because it was probably true. Jake was many things. A computer expert was not one of them. Another notification appeared on a public display. Then another. Then dozens. The station network was busy. Very busy. People were sharing updates. Locations. Information. Resources. Helios was not waiting for security forces to solve the situation. Helios was solving it itself. The stranger slowly turned in a full circle. Everywhere he looked, people were watching. Not with fear. Not with hostility. With expectation. As if they already knew how this story ended. For the first time, Lyria saw concern replace confidence in his eyes. That was the moment she realized the balance had shifted. Not because of force. Not because of authority. Because the station trusted Jake more than it feared the criminals. The realization seemed to strike her with unexpected force. She had spent years believing trust was fragile. Something difficult to earn and easy to lose. Jake had proven something different. Trust could become infrastructure. It could become a foundation strong enough to support an entire community. The stranger finally looked directly at Jake. What happens next? Jake considered the question for a moment. Then he looked around at the hundreds of people gathered throughout the terminal. More were still arriving. Mechanics, pilots, merchants, technicians, friends. That depends, Jake said quietly, on whether you are smart enough to learn from your mistake. Somewhere deep within Helios Station, hidden behind maintenance doors and service corridors, another piece of the station-wide response quietly clicked into place. And for the first time all day, the people behind the operation were no longer the only ones with a plan. The next 20 minutes changed the atmosphere of Helios Station completely. Nobody rushed. Nobody panicked. That was what made it so unsettling for the criminals. They had prepared for resistance. They had prepared for security teams. They had prepared for alarms and emergency responses. What they had not prepared for was patience. The crowd continued growing. Not by dozens, by ones and twos. A mechanic arriving from a lower maintenance deck. A shuttle pilot finishing a shift. A medical technician carrying a tablet. An elderly cargo dispatcher who should have been home hours ago. They arrived quietly and took positions throughout the concourse. The stranger watched them with increasing concern. Every new arrival seemed ordinary. Yet together, they created something impossible to ignore. Lyria noticed a familiar face near a transport kiosk. Then another. Then another. Some she recognized from station life. Others she had met only once. All of them shared one thing in common. Every single one greeted Jake with a nod. Not because he was important. Because he was trusted. "How many people know you?" she asked. Jake thought about it. Less than it looks like. Lyria glanced around at the hundreds of people now occupying nearby walkways, observation decks, cafes, and maintenance access points. That answer is not helping. Jake smiled faintly. For the first time all day, she saw something resembling embarrassment. The attention clearly made him uncomfortable. The stranger activated his communicator again. Static. He tried another frequency. More static. Then another. Nothing. A young engineer, standing near a service hatch, quietly sipped coffee and looked in the opposite direction. Jake pretended not to notice. The engineer pretended not to notice that Jake noticed. Helios Station operated on layers of understanding that outsiders rarely grasped. The stranger finally looked toward one of his companions. "Find out what is happening." The companion hurried away toward a terminal. Less than 2 minutes later, he returned, looking confused. "Everything is functioning. Then why are communications failing?" "I do not know." The answer clearly did not help. Lyria watched the exchange carefully. Their operation was unraveling. Not because systems were broken. Because systems were working exactly as intended. The station was protecting itself. Across the concourse, several public displays suddenly switched from advertisements to transit information. Arrival schedules filled the screens. Cargo manifests appeared. Dock assignments updated. Harmless data. Yet Jake studied the screens and smiled. Lyria followed his gaze. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then she noticed subtle patterns hidden within the information. Certain cargo routes were changing. Certain docking assignments were moving. Resources were being repositioned. Not by one person, by dozens, maybe hundreds. You knew this would happen, she said quietly. Jake shook his head. No. Then why do you seem so calm? He looked around at the station, at the workers, the merchants, the pilots, the mechanics, the people who kept Helios alive every day. Because I know these people. The answer carried more weight than any threat ever could. The stranger heard it too. His expression darkened. For the first time, he was beginning to understand the scale of his mistake. He had viewed Helios Station as a location. Jake viewed it as a community. Those were not the same thing. A soft cheer suddenly rose from somewhere deeper within the crowd. Then another. People were receiving updates. Positive updates. Good news. The details remained unclear, but the mood shifted noticeably. Confidence spread through the station like sunlight breaking through clouds. The stranger looked around. Everywhere he turned, people seemed calmer than before, more confident than before, as if they already knew something he did not. Lyria felt it too. Whatever was happening behind the scenes had reached a turning point. She looked toward Jake. What are they celebrating? Jake listened for a moment. Then a familiar chime echoed from one of the public terminals. His smile widened slightly. Looks like someone found the missing piece. The stranger immediately stiffened. What missing piece? Jake looked directly at him. The answer came gently, almost kindly. The part of your plan that was supposed to work. The stranger's expression hardened. For the first time since arriving at Helios Station, he stopped acting like a man executing a flawless operation and started looking like a man searching for an exit. Around him, the station continued functioning with almost irritating normality. Cargo drones floated through overhead transit lanes. Departure schedules updated across massive screens. Travelers ordered coffee. Children pointed at ships beyond the glass ceiling. Nothing appeared dramatic. Yet beneath that ordinary surface, an invisible tide had completely shifted. The stranger activated his communicator again. This time a response arrived. A brief burst of static. Then a voice. We found the package. Relief flashed across his face. It lasted less than 2 seconds. And he demanded. More static followed. It is not here. The relief vanished. Nearby, several station workers exchanged knowing smiles. Jake looked almost disappointed. That was your missing piece. The stranger ignored him. Search again. We already did. The reply sounded frustrated. The container exists. The manifest exists. The tracking codes exist. But the package itself was moved hours ago. Silence settled over the concourse. Lyria slowly turned toward Jake. Her gray eyes narrowed. Hours ago, Jake suddenly became fascinated by a nearby advertisement for replacement air filters. Jake, he sighed. What? Did you know this would happen? Not exactly. How much did you know? Jake scratched the back of his neck. Several people in the crowd laughed before he even answered. Apparently, they already knew what was coming. I had a feeling. Lyria rolled her eyes. Your feelings are becoming very suspicious. More laughter spread through the station. Even some travelers who knew nothing about the situation were beginning to enjoy themselves. The stranger stared at Jake. You moved the package. No. Then who did? Jake pointed vaguely toward the crowd. Helios. The answer sounded absurd. Yet nobody present seemed surprised. The stranger looked around. Hundreds of faces met his gaze. Mechanics, pilots, engineers, merchants, medics, dock workers. Every one of them appeared calm, comfortable, certain. The realization arrived slowly. His operation had never been competing against a single human. It had been competing against an entire community. The package had not vanished because of Jake. It had vanished because somebody overheard something. Somebody else noticed something strange. Another person made a phone call. Another adjusted a schedule. Another rerouted a shipment. Hundreds of small decisions had combined into one enormous response. No central command. No secret mastermind. Just people helping people. The stranger finally understood what made the situation impossible. There was nobody to defeat. No leader to remove. No system to disable. Helios Station was protecting itself through trust. Lyria watched the realization unfold across his face. Then something else occurred to her. She looked around the station, around the crowd, around the people who had arrived simply because Jake's name appeared in a message. You really did not call them, did you? Jake shook his head. No, not one person, not one. The answer lingered in the air. Lyria felt unexpectedly moved by it. For years, she had believed strength came from discipline, preparation, and authority. Those things mattered. But standing in the middle of Helios Station, she was witnessing another kind of strength entirely. A strength built slowly, quietly, through kindness repeated thousands of times until it became something larger than any individual. The stranger lowered his communicator. His shoulders sagged. The operation was finished. Everyone knew it. Nobody celebrated loudly. Nobody mocked him. Helios was better than that. The crowd simply remained where they were, calm and patient, giving him the opportunity to recognize the truth for himself. Above them, starlight shimmered through the transparent dome. The station seemed brighter than before. Warmer somehow. The stranger looked at Jake one final time. All of this happened because of one friend? Jake glanced toward Lyria. The silver-haired woman met his eyes. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Jake smiled. No. He slowly looked around at the hundreds of people surrounding them. It happened because nobody gets through life with just one friend. An hour later, Helios Station sounded normal again. The steady hum of life had returned. Cargo announcements echoed through the concourse. Docking schedules scrolled across massive screens. Travelers hurried toward departing gates, carrying luggage, coffee cups, and 1,000 different destinations. To a visitor arriving from another system, nothing unusual would have seemed to happen at all. Yet everyone who had been there knew better. They carried the memory with them, not as a story about criminals or stolen cargo, not as a story about fear, as a story about people. The crowd slowly dispersed. Mechanics returned to maintenance bays. Pilots headed toward their ships. Merchants reopened storefronts. Medics resumed their rounds. One by one, they drifted back into the rhythm of station life. Before leaving, many offered Jake a wave, a nod, or a simple smile. He returned each gesture with the same awkward gratitude. The attention still made him uncomfortable. Lyria noticed. You know, she said as they walked together through the concourse, most people would enjoy being treated like a hero. Jake grimaced. That sounds exhausting. She laughed softly. It was the first truly relaxed laugh she had managed all day. The sound surprised even her. They continued walking beneath the vast glass dome. Beyond it, stars stretched endlessly across the darkness. Freight vessels glided between docking rings like silent ships crossing a cosmic ocean. The station lights reflected in the transparent ceiling, creating the illusion that Helios floated between two skies. For a while, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, familiar. Eventually, they reached an observation deck overlooking the primary docking corridor. The area was quiet now. Only a handful of travelers occupied nearby seats. Jake leaned against the railing and stared out at the stars. Lyria studied him. There were many things she wanted to ask. One question rose above all the others. Why? He looked over. Why what? Why do you keep helping people? Jake frowned slightly. That is a strange question. No. She shook her head. What happened today should not have been possible. Her eyes drifted toward the station below. Hundreds of people answered without being asked. Entire sections of Helios moved together. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Jake followed her gaze. The lights of the station shimmered like constellations. People helped because they are good people. Lyria smiled. That sounds exactly like something you would say. Because it is true. She was quiet for several moments. During her years as a security officer, she had seen governments command loyalty through power. Corporations purchase loyalty through money. Leaders demand loyalty through authority. What she witnessed today was different. Nobody had been ordered. Nobody had been paid. Nobody had been forced. They simply cared. The realization settled deep inside her. In my culture, she said quietly, trust is considered a resource. Valuable, limited, difficult to replace. Jake nodded. That makes sense. Humans treat it differently. How so? She looked at him. The answer came slowly. You invested. For the first time all evening, Jake appeared genuinely surprised. Then he smiled. Maybe. Lyria leaned against the railing beside him. Below them, Helios Station continued its endless dance of arrivals and departures. Thousands of lives crossing paths. Thousands of stories beginning and ending every day. Yet one truth now seemed obvious. Communities were not built by laws. They were built by people choosing each other again and again. The stars reflected in the observation deck glass. Their light shimmered across Lyria's pale features. After a long silence, she reached out and gently placed her hand over Jake's. He glanced down but said nothing. Neither did she. No dramatic speech was necessary. No grand declaration. The moment spoke for itself. Together they watched the ships move through the darkness. And somewhere beyond the station, beyond the trade routes and distant worlds, the lesson continued traveling outward through the galaxy. Not because anyone announced it, because people remembered it. In a universe obsessed with power, humanity remained something stranger. A species willing to stand together simply because someone mattered. And sometimes that was stronger than anything else among the stars.